I've made a lot of videos going through the career modes of different F1 games and they all have their own distinct characteristics. F1 24 though, with its reworked driver career which has brought in new cutscenes, new systems and modified versions of existing ones, can be summed up as the contradiction career. That's true for so many reasons which I'll go into later, but I'll give you an idea of just one of the issues. Me and Logan Sargent were the two most impactful drivers in the entire career, and that is no word of a lie. And that's doubly amazing because since I decided to start my driver career as a Mercedes Junior and therefore it made sense at the time to join Williams, Sargent wasn't even racing in F1 to begin with as I was his replacement. Also, the reason this is on driver career and not my team is because all of the improvements, changes and additions made, and we're talking everything from the R&D scenarios to the grid reveal cutscene to even the in-game emails summarising driver changes, aren't in my team. In fact, the last time I saw that email in a Codemasters F1 game was in F1 2019 before my team was even a thing. So we're talking 5 years ago. Nice to see it again though. So into the career mode, and me and Albon were able to develop our car faster than the other teams, and just half a season in, Williams were right up there with a front running pack and I was able to score 7 points across both races in Austria. Albon's best result came in Spa with 5th place and that was our peak, partly because he then decided to turn his attention to durability upgrades, leaving me on my own actually trying to make our car quicker. But such is how fast car development can be and how it can rapidly change the pecking order, McLaren went from being slower than us and pointless in Miami to race winners in Las Vegas thanks to Norris. Way too little, way too late though, as Max Verstappen was the drivers' champion, securing the title in Singapore. 6 Grand Prix and 3 sprint races from the end of the season. Charles Leclerc was his closest competition, but that's a bit misleading as he was some 259 points behind the Dutchman, with Alonso in 3rd and the only other person within 300 points of the top spot. Then you have Norris in 4th before you get to Perez in the 2nd Red Bull, whilst Sainz, Piastri and both Mercedes led by Russell were the last on triple figures. Lance Stroll, considering how well his teammate did, had an absolute shocker with just 29 points, nearly 300 less than Alonso and exactly the same amount as me in a Williams. Sauber had a much stronger year than in real life, and everyone else, namely both Alpines, RBs and Haas, failed to score any points all year. The constructors is already more or less spoken for, with Red Bull the champions on a grand total of 865. Worth noting that despite Alonso's exceptional performance, Stroll let the side down as Aston Martin placed 4th, behind Ferrari and McLaren, and only narrowly outscored Mercedes. Possibly part of the reason for the late shake-up in race results was down to some teams focusing more than others on the upcoming rule change. At Williams we protected all of our powertrain and aerodynamic upgrades, and that meant that we had, initially, on paper at least, the 2nd fastest car. For Season 2, Hamilton left Mercedes for Ferrari, quite fitting of course, especially as he's replacing Sainz, who in turn took his seat at Mercedes. And let's not forget it was gently rumoured in real life that Sainz could have ended up there for 2025. Finally, Sargent has returned to F1 by replacing Kevin Magnussen, booting him out of F1. Essentially putting the Dane on some Mika Hakkinen style sabbatical, since driver retirements, which we've seen in previous F1 games, aren't in this driver career mode and Magnussen never gets another seat in F1. It's worth saying that the first season and a half of this career was done on the game in the state it was when it released, so before the version 1.3 update. Despite our car's performance on paper, it didn't materialise until I took our first race win in the Japanese Grand Prix I took part in. Not much to say other than the usual for the time, me deliberately not qualifying in Q3 since the AI were too easy to beat in the wet, the huge DRS trains locking everyone together and always keeping me within touching distance at first, the pit stops being unrealistic in a number of ways, not helped by how crowded the pit lane was due to everyone being so close together. And that shook up the order somewhat and helped me slightly, but it was a more competitive second stint for me in knowing where to best try and pass the AI. That meant I worked my way up to first and took my and Williams' first win of the career. That opened the floodgates as Albon placed 2nd in Imola and had multiple podium finishes, particularly in the second half of the season. Not only that, but we started to see the Verstappen dominance era come to an end as Aston Martin, were the strongest team in the latter half, and Alonso won every single Grand Prix from Italy through to Vegas. That's 7 in a row. But that wasn't enough to stop Verstappen, who sealed his, if we're including his real life titles as well, 5th driver's title in the penultimate round. Alonso was just 62 points away from becoming a triple world champion, and there's Leclerc and Norris over 200 away from Verstappen. Such is the improvement we've made to Williams. Albon and Perez tied on 229 points, but Albon finished ahead by virtue of having more second place results. I outscored Stroll, who to be fair got into triple figures this time and beat Russell and Piastri, although that should be a given considering the difference in car performance. Both Hamilton and Sainz were roundly beaten by their new teammates, and Gasly and Bottas were the last to get any points on the board. Aston Martin and Williams were the big movers in Season 2, reducing Red Bull's advantage at the top, and both outscored Ferrari and McLaren. Sauber went from 32 points last year to just 1 this time, but only dropped 1 place in the table, and that was to Alpine. At this point though, at Williams, we'd ran out of upgrades we could buy, as all that was left were the ones that required 60% recognition. So, and I'm aware that this sentence coming up is stupid, but it's the logic the game operates under, neither me nor Albon had the respect within the team needed for them to design the top tier upgrades. But it's the same story for everyone ultimately in this 3rd season, and so it's the status quo, except with Pierre Gasly, despite the fact he scored all of Alpine's points in Season 2, either being dropped or leaving voluntarily to be out of F1 entirely and replaced by Daniel Ricciardo. That left a seat free at RB, which was filled by current F2 and next year Haas F1 driver, Ollie Behrman. I could talk through this season, but some rogue results aside, the only massively weird thing to happen was me getting a huge attribute boost after I lost my rivalry with Lewis Hamilton. Verstappen won his 3rd or 6th if you want to include his real life ones, Drivers' Championship on the bounce. And this time Leclerc was his closest competition, although only 12 points separated Charles from Fernando. Other than that, the flatline in car development meant Williams slipped back down the order, and we're still yet to see a driver join a new team and do well. Hamilton and Sainz were once again thrashed by Leclerc and Russell. Tsunoda had a great year and scored 16 points for RB, whereas Behrman on his debut got none. And at Alpine, Ocon grabbed a point and Ricciardo didn't. In the Constructors, Red Bull won once again, and the only changes from the 2nd season are that Ferrari outscored McLaren, Williams dropped from 3rd to 6th, and RB finally got some points to their name, whereas Sauber had their first pointless season in this career mode. At least Season 4 promised real difference with a 3 department-wide rule change for all 3 of the performance-impacting areas of the car. At Williams, we'd saved all but one of our upgrades, and I helped them out further by applying our first R&D scenario, namely the chip shortage one, which limits every team to 1 upgrade per month, which will help Williams maintain their car advantage for longer by holding everyone else back. Red Bull lost out big time with the rule changes. They had the 5th best car, and even the now 98 rated Verstappen isn't good enough to overcome that big of a deficit. In other news, Bottas and Sargent were forced out of F1 to be replaced by 2 rookies, specifically Enzo Fittipaldi at Sauber and Mercedes Jr. Frederick Vesti at Haas. Williams started off strong as Albon won in Bahrain, whilst I DNF'd, which is typical of my luck with reliability in this game save. And then we got the team's first 1-2 in Saudi Arabia. I did the Australian Grand Prix to witness on-track and all-conquering Williams team, but of course, since this is F1 24, that's not quite what I got. DRS train stopped Albon from pulling away despite his car advantage, and then a slow stop, 1 lap later than those around him, dropped him from 1st to 9th. So it was up to me to maintain Williams' race-winning streak, which I did, albeit with a tactical last lap pass as I spent the race deliberately using Sainz for DRS as, for whatever reason, I had to spend most of the race lift and coasting just to go the full distance. Either way, I won. Sainz finally had a decent performance in Mercedes colours to finish 2nd, and Albon recovered to 4th, but none of those are the big storylines from that race. I ended Season 3 at 46% recognition, signed a new deal at 45%, but immediately dropped to 43% for reasons I wish I could explain. Then after the Saudi GP, I lowered my contract target to try and get Albon into the magical 60% region, and that bumped me down to 42%. Even though I won in Australia and Albon finished 4th, my recognition fell by 2%. I said at the start that this is the contradiction career and I've already been rewarded for failure. Now I'm technically being punished for success, except that's not really true. Albon being at 60% recognition is a godsend, since it means he can finally access the final batch of car upgrades and we can try to cement our place at the top of the tree in F1. Albon bought 2 upgrades before my recognition, again for no real reason that I can understand, moved back up to 41% and locked out those upgrades again. But fortunately, Williams found out about my secret meeting with Aston Martin and that put me down to 38%, which was brilliant. It's sort of self-sabotage, but the quicker car is better for Albon and me. And the team will always want to retain me as long as I meet my rating target, which I easily can, because it's so low. Which is partly why my recognition is so low in the first place. It's a perfect cycle that works wonders, even though I get the sense it's exactly the opposite of what the developers intended when they put this system together. But to be honest, the reason I started making these all seasons of career mode videos way back in 2016 on F1 2016 was because to me it was screamingly obvious that there weren't enough car upgrades to last a 10 season long career in that game. That's a matter of simple mental arithmetic, and I assume there must be some secret extra batch of upgrades or a mid-career reset, but there wasn't. That absolutely stunned me because it's like no one had actually played the career mode before they put the game out. This isn't as obvious a flaw, but the point still stands. The only downside to this is it meant Albon dictated the car development direction by himself. And after a while he became fixated on durability upgrades, all the while our pace advantage was shrinking and our results slipping. Fortunately though, we did enough early on and Alex Albon was crowned the Formula 1 Drivers' Champion in the USA. But George Russell won that Grand Prix. Our dip in form plus the fact I retired from 5 Grand Prix compared to only 1 for Russell and none at all for Albon meant Williams didn't get a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship. Russell was the runner-up and some 148 points behind Albon, with me in 3rd and Sainz in the 2nd Mercedes having a much stronger year than previously. Alonso outscored Norris and Verstappen, which says a lot about how much Red Bull have fallen. Then there's Leclerc, Piastri down on double figures, Stroll, Hamilton on just 32 points, Tsunoda in an RB on 20, then you get to Sergio Perez on a mere 6. That's right down in the zone with the teams that struggle to score points, although this year Hülkenberg and Behrman both got on the score sheet, leaving only Ricciardo, Vesti and both Saubers on 0. In the Constructors, Williams set a new point scoring record in this career on 888. And it's a Mercedes-engined 1-2-3-4 with Aston Martin at the back, still hindered by having Stroll in the 2nd seat. Red Bull narrowly beat Ferrari and from there it's the same as last season except Haas scored points, leaving Sauber all on their own with nothing. Me losing to Russell and therefore gaining a huge rating boost to bump me up from 83 to 85 overall potentially caused a bit of an issue. Williams ended the year with all the chassis upgrades, but still some of the 60% recognition required aero and powertrain upgrades still to get. But Williams would only renew me at the lowest of 44% recognition despite ending the year on 39%. To be fair, the years I spent with the team didn't help as that also provides a boost, but it meant, apart from the couple of aero upgrades we had in development at the end of last season, we were at a standstill in terms of car development, but then everyone else hit their limit at some point in Season 5 and at least we had some of those final secret car upgrades, which can't be said for anyone else. On that note, and this will be relevant as well as being hilarious in its own right, Logan Sargent is back in F1 and he's replaced Sergio Perez at Red Bull. At a time where Verstappen was at the very sharp end, finishing on the podium and getting close to winning races again, his new teammate Logan Sargent still hasn't scored a point after half a season. By that point, the only others who also had him were both Haas and Saubers. At the very next race though, which was won by Norris interestingly, Sargent finished in 10th place to finally score a World Championship point. He went on to grab a couple of 7th place results at the end of the year, whilst his former team and former teammate won their 2nd Drivers' and Constructors' Championships in a row, with Albon becoming a double world champion in Brazil. Ultimately though, Red Bull had the fastest car at the end of the season and Verstappen won 4 of the last 5 races. That's because they had a huge development spike, so both Williams and Red Bull have a significant advantage over everyone else. A spike of development that sharp and that sudden after half a year can only mean one thing: they, like us, have got some of the final batch of secret upgrades on their car. And that's the advantage of having a clear number 1 and number 2 driver pairing. And let's be honest, Verstappen and Sargent creates a crystal clear team dynamic. And it meant Verstappen finally had the recognition needed to buy those extra upgrades. That's why Red Bull signing Sargent was actually genius, and it shows just how ridiculous the recognition and secret car upgrade system is in practice. Me and Sargent have been the 2 most important and impactful drivers in this entire career mode, and Red Bull have a lot to thank the American for. In my F1 2021 all 10 seasons of career mode video, Red Bull signed Nikita Mazepin. And that was funny but plainly stupid, although on track Mazepin wasn't atrocious. Now I don't want to draw too many comparisons between Sargent and Mazepin, but the fact of the matter is, in both cases they're the lowest rated current F1 driver, and neither of them under normal circumstances should have been racing for Red Bull. But ultimately in Sargent's case he became the most important person in the team. Yes, he only scored 17 points and finished 13th in the Drivers' Championship. Over 450 away from Albon at the top, 300 behind his teammate, 12 less than Tsunoda in the sister RB car, and even 7 less than Hamilton, who's just getting worse and worse. Here's a sentence I never thought I'd say: Lewis Hamilton is a burden at Ferrari, but Logan Sargent is a godsend for Red Bull. Ricciardo finally got a point for Alpine, but still scored an 1/8 the amount of his teammate Ocon. So we're still not seeing drivers join new teams and thrive. Red Bull outscored Aston Martin this year, but other than that, same story as last season, only our margin at the top was cut significantly, but still a comfortable 149 point lead over runners-up Mercedes. Hopefully I can break that trend, as I left Williams since my ever-increasing recognition boost from staying with the team made it increasingly tough for me to improve Williams. I'm just harming them by staying there, so I went over to McLaren. But initially I still would have had too much recognition within the team, even at the lowest possible target, so instead I took the opposite approach and went for the highest possible target, knowing I'll underachieve against it and hope I can drag down my recognition that way. An aerodynamic and powertrain rule change set out to shake up the order, but my parting gift to Williams was to protect all of their upgrades. So they started off substantially clear of everyone else. Sergio Perez was a beneficiary from that, as he returned to F1 as my replacement at Williams. Piastri replaced Verstappen, not Sargent, at Red Bull, and Ayumu Iwasa took Joe's seat at Sauber. So Joe, and much more shockingly, Max Verstappen are both free agents and out of F1 completely. Not that the game had entirely realised that.
Well, welcome back. Let's start with a nice, easy question. How do you stop Max Verstappen?
A lackluster start, along with my secret meeting with Aston Martin not remaining secret, was exactly what I needed to give McLaren access to the final wave of car parts. With no R&D scenario restricting development and Norris having built up a stockpile of resource points for about a year that he could not spend as he had nothing to spend them on, it's fair to say McLaren's development in the second half of the year was dramatic. That's how vital and arguably game-breaking those car upgrades are. So much so, Norris actually broke clear of DRS range as the race leader, and at Monza of all places. I meanwhile started at the back, and carving my way through the field was one hell of an experience, as the overspeed I had with slipstream and DRS was crazy. We're a far cry from GP2 engineer and McLaren, that's for sure. But even more amazingly, Lando Norris was crowned the Season 6 Drivers' Champion. Truly impressive stuff, as he had a good run at the start of the year anyway, but when those secret upgrades kicked in, he was unstoppable. Pretty much literally, as he won 13 Grand Prix in a row from Britain to Abu Dhabi. And he got the fastest lap in all but 2 of them, and the only 2 he didn't, I did. Behind Norris was Albon, then Piastri in the lead Red Bull, with Perez in the second, Williams 4th. Russell outscored me to take 5th, while Sainz got less than half the points of his teammate down in 9th. Sargent didn't do anywhere near as badly as I would have thought, placing in the top half of the table with 101 points to his name, more than Stroll and Hamilton. Tsunoda bested Behrman in the RB intra-team battle again and were the last to score any points. This was very nearly the first season where different teams won the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, as Williams led the Constructors leaving Qatar. But McLaren led the point standings once and once only, and it just so happened to be the only time it mattered, making McLaren the 3rd different team in this game save to be crowned Constructors' Champions. Aston Martin slipped down to 6th in the table, and 3 teams, namely Alpine, Haas and Sauber, failed to get on the score sheet. At this point, it would be cool to try and help one of the backmarkers, especially since I failed my racing target so badly that McLaren refused to keep me on. But what's odd is that I can't join Sauber, but I can join Ferrari. Make that make sense. And since my options were them, or going back to Williams, I replaced Hamilton at Ferrari, which is slightly sad, but to be fair, Hamilton's results have been so underwhelming that he should have been retired a while back. We know the drill by now: come in, make the team hate me, but luckily, Fred Vasseur already had that plan, because even though I signed a 44% recognition contract, I instantly had 39% recognition. This is just a McLaren development story repeated, except Ferrari have to deal with McLaren, and I made them too good. McLaren were the first team to have all of the 60% recognition needed secret upgrades, and Ferrari soon became the second after using the living cheat code of me. Joe went to Alpine because Ocon was my replacement at McLaren, but there's not an Ocon-Norris partnership as Norris left F1 entirely and was replaced by Lewis Hamilton. So with how dominant McLaren were at the start of the season, it was Ocon versus Hamilton for the Drivers' Championship. Ocon was perfectly capable of winning races, securing 7 Grand Prix wins. But he was up against a rejuvenated Lewis Hamilton, and even though both ended the year on the same overall rating of 85, Hamilton was too fierce a competitor, and so Lewis Hamilton, on his return to McLaren, finally won his record-breaking 8th Formula 1 Drivers' Championship. The game said he won it in Las Vegas, but that's not true, as at that point he was only 57 points clear of Ocon, with 2 Grand Prix, 2 fastest lap points and a sprint race wins worth of points still on the table. That's 60 altogether, so clearly the game forgot about the sprint race, and that was actually where he wrapped up the driver's title. Charles Leclerc was in a group of his own in 3rd, 126 points behind Hamilton, but 141 clear of Piastri for Red Bull in 5th. Williams still held their own with some of those 60% upgrades, but Russell and the Mercedes split the teammates of Albon and Perez. Logan Sargent outscored Fernando Alonso. That's quite something, but even if you ignore the car difference, by this point, Alonso would be 49 years old and his overall rating has dropped from 91 to 85. Sainz, Stroll, Tsunoda and Behrman were the last to claim any points, with neither Alpine, Haas or Sauber able to do so. The Constructors' Championship is basically already spoken for, but it says a lot about how dominant McLaren were that they broke the 1,000 point barrier and had more than Ferrari and Red Bull combined. For Season 8 there was a chassis, powertrain and durability department rule change, but at this late stage of the career it doesn't do much. It would have done if it wiped out the 60% recognition upgrades, but at Ferrari we were smart enough to prevent that from happening, and the same is true for the other teams lucky enough to have them. So for the sake of variety and to see how big of a difference it can make, I applied the balancing out the field R&D scenario, which takes away one random upgrade from the team with the best car before each race weekend. I say random, but as far as I can tell it never took away the 60% recognition upgrade, so all it did was take away an upgrade from either McLaren or Ferrari, which we could and would immediately buy back. Hamilton wasn't around to defend his driver's crown as he bowed out of the sport and was replaced by Formula 2 champion, and funnily enough a former McLaren IndyCar driver, Théo Pourchaire. This time Ferrari had the car to give McLaren a run for their money from the outset, and Leclerc was able to get race wins, and we even got the odd 1-2. McLaren and particularly Ocon started the year stronger, but Leclerc came into his own in the second half, and a DNF for Ocon in Brazil gave Leclerc a 1-point championship lead. What followed though were 3 McLaren 1-2 finishes in a row, which meant Esteban Ocon became the 5th different driver to win the Drivers' Championship in this career mode. Although it went down to the final day and Charles Leclerc was right there with him, but ultimately fell short by 35 points. Théo Pourchaire had a brilliant debut season to be just 69 points off Ocon and miles clear of everyone else. Once again, Russell did exceptionally well to outscore Perez in the second Williams, and Sargent outscored Alonso for the 2nd year in a row. Arguably, the standout performer is Frederick Vestier Haas, who scored 2 championship points whereas 7 drivers didn't, including both RBs and his own teammate Hülkenberg. But we're so far into the future now that time has had a significant impact. Verstappen's not even in F1, but he's dropped from his high of 98 to 91 overall. Vesti is the 5th best driver racing in F1, which makes him an enormous asset to Haas, Because at the other end of the age scale, you've got the likes of Ricciardo at 82 rated, Alonso sunk to just 83 now that he's in his 50s, Perez is only 79 rated, Hulkenberg is officially the worst driver in F1 on just 78 overall, but it's Kevin Magnussen who's the worst original F1 driver on a mere 76 overall. Such is the impact of the secret car upgrades that the only 4 teams that have them headed the Constructors' Championship, with McLaren this time just below the 1,000 point mark. Only 2 driver changes for Season 9, namely Lance Stroll leaving Aston Martin for Alpine, and Jack Doohan taking his old seat at Aston Martin, all of which boots Joe out of F1. So, just to be clear, the Alpine Junior and in real life next year Alpine race driver of Doohan isn't racing for Alpine, and Stroll isn't driving for the team that his dad owns. The penultimate season was a Ferrari and McLaren rematch, and Ferrari had no initial disadvantage and, as an average, the fastest car, even though the balancing out the field R&D scenario slightly complicates it. But Leclerc once again failed to win the championship and Ocon couldn't defend it. So Théo Pourchaire won the Formula 1 Drivers' Championship. In fact, Leclerc was even further away from winning than before, as he was 53 points down on Pourchaire, with Ocon 88 points away from retaining his crown. Jack Doohan outscored Alonso in their first season together, Vesti scored yet more points for Haas, and for the first time Behrman definitively beat Tsunoda in the RB intra-team battle, as he scored a point whereas Tsunoda didn't. Also, Ricciardo, now that he's teammates to Stroll, was the best Alpine driver for the first time ever, and even scored a point unlike Stroll. The Constructors' Championship finished in the same order as it did in Season 8, except now only one team failed to score a point, and it was Sauber, the same team that was bizarrely impressive at the start of the career. Since there was nothing else I could do to help Ferrari, now they have every upgrade, and all I'm doing by staying there is killing their chances at winning the Constructors' Championship, I finally left them. And since I still can't join a backmarker, I went to Red Bull to partner Piastri. That means Sargent is out of F1 for good, but the recognition difference between Piastri and Sargent was never big enough to get any of the secret upgrades, unlike when Verstappen was at the team. I signed a 2-year contract, but despite the fact the game acknowledges I'm contracted until the end of the 11th season, this career mode caps out at 10 seasons, so this is indeed the final one. It was all changing the important seasons. George Russell took my place at Ferrari, Zane Maloney was his replacement at Mercedes, but it's yet another change at McLaren as Arthur Leclerc, younger brother of Charles, took Ocon's place. Ultimately, there was nothing I could do to drag my recognition down enough to help Red Bull get the remaining secret upgrades. They had all the chassis ones already from the Sargent Verstappen era, but I couldn't get them anymore, and even if I could, it would have been too late to interfere with the McLaren and Ferrari title battle, since those two teams really were in a totally separate league to everyone else. So this is a true four-way fight between George Russell in his debut season at Ferrari, Charles Leclerc and his brother Arthur, and the reigning champion Théo Pourchaire. As a side note to the championship fight, even though it was only heating up further as just 9 points separated the top 4 leaving Monaco, I left there as officially the best driver in F1. That's because I lost my championship rivalry with Piastri and won my rating rivalry with Sainz, the latter being purely a case of who could decrease in overall rating the slowest. We're both old enough at this point that our ratings were heading south, but his were tanking, so it wasn't difficult for me to come out on top. So that win and loss gave me a colossal boost in all ratings, including focus, taking me up to 90 overall, which is on a par with Verstappen, but since he's not in F1, that makes me the best guy around. A fact which is so obviously not true if I'm being beaten by Piastri, but let's just file that with a long list of issues that do, or at least did, exist in F1 24. Halfway in, here's the sticks. Pourchaire amassed a small lead of 20 points over Arthur Leclerc, but Charles is only 24 back, and Russell 28. So it's still anybody's for the taking. As if to prove that point, Pourchaire had his first DNF of the season in Hungary, and the rest finished in the opposite order to where they were placed in the championship standings, which means only 6 points separated the top 4, with Pourchaire still narrowly leading the way. It was a closely fought title race right to the end, and one moment of bad luck could change everything, as a retirement for Pourchaire in Las Vegas gave race winner Russell the championship lead with 2 rounds to go. Contrast that with Charles Leclerc, the only top 4 driver yet to retire from a Grand Prix or sprint, Yet he's lacked pace in the second half of the season to such an extent that he's pretty much out of contention, making this now a three-way title fight. McLaren took a 1-2 in both the sprint and Grand Prix in Qatar, but most points went Arthur Leclerc's way, meaning Porsche only cut down Russell's advantage by 5 points, as now realistically it's going to be one of them taking the outright honours. I took part in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix as I needed to see exactly how this title fight would resolve itself. Obviously though, this being F124, the DRS trains kicked in and held together not just both McLarens and Ferraris for the whole of the first stint, but also Albon, Piastri and me. So this was a race and therefore championship largely decided by the pit crews, and the upshot is, both McLarens had decent stops and both Ferraris had slow ones. That meant the rest of the Grand Prix was both McLarens on their own in first and second, and both Ferraris isolated together in third and fourth. It was entirely in McLaren's hands as a 1-2 led by Porsche would guarantee McLaren winning both championships. Porsche moved into first, but then Arthur Leclerc fought back, reclaimed the lead of the race, and never gave it up. As illogical and dramatic an event as this would be if it were real life, one that would forever paint Arthur Leclerc as a truly awful teammate, is what happened here on F124, and Porsche even made a move on the final lap but could not get by. And with that, the Ferrari driver of George Russell was crowned the 10th and final season's Drivers' Champion, in the end winning the title by a margin of just 1 point. That makes him the 7th different driver to win in this game save and the 5th different person in a row. Arthur Leclerc, terrible teammate but an exceptional debut F1 season to be just 9 points away from winning a driver's title on the first time of asking, and to outscore his much more accomplished older brother in an on-paper faster car who was 57 points away from winning. 10 seasons in though, what we're seeing is a changing of the guard as the talents of the older drivers fade away and are overtaken by the younger drivers. Albon beat Perez by over 100 points, and in fact Perez massively underperformed in that car as he was beaten by the Aston Martin of Jack Doohan. The Alonso-Doohan comparison is the most stark about just how far into the future we are, but to be fair, the fact Alonso is even still in F1 is itself bizarre. The only real exception is Mercedes, as Sainz scored 49 points, 10 more than rookie Zane Maloney. But neither did amazingly there, as let's not forget last season Russell finished 7th in that car, with more points than they scored combined. And he split the two Williams, although that really was an enormous overachievement. Behrman and Tsunoda scored a point each for RB, and then that's it. Not even Vesti could scrape a point, but the fact that he's the first of the drivers on 0 points, and Hülkenberg's last, again speaks to just how impactful age is this far into the career. McLaren won the Constructors' Championship with a 47-point margin over Ferrari, and then other than Aston Martin beating Mercedes, thanks to Jack Doohan's heroics, is business as usual. There's no real ceremony to the end of the career, but it's a slight step up from what we've seen in previous games. Firstly, you actually go back to the career menu rather than just being booted out to the main menu. And after the usual season complete screen, you get a career complete screen, with stats about your career playthrough. Although, that's another thing that's glitched in this game, is at the bottom it just says fastest. I'm fairly certain that should say fastest laps, but the bottom is cut off and I have no idea if there's any other stats below that we can't see, because it's not a scrolling menu. I mean, if it's meant to be, it doesn't work, because both the D-pad and the analog sticks did nothing. And that's it. Then it's just back to the main menu. I've racked on F124 a lot in this video, never mind my previous one, but fair play to EA and Codemasters, as this was a genuinely fun career mode. Yes, it's not very well thought through and flawed in so many ways, and the only reason we had any genuine shake-up in the order was because of my interventions. So in that sense it's no different to any other career mode after F1 2020. But the unpredictable driver transfers, overall career presentation, and the fact that driver age played a significant factor, meaning we slowly saw a changing of the guard, all mean I enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys enjoy watching this summary of it, and if you're still watching then thanks. And next time I'll be ploughing through F1 Manager 2024's career mode, and having gone well into the future in that game already, I can tell you it's an absolute riot. So I'll see you then.